And welcome back to another episode with Fight Night Picks. As always, we're brought to you by SimBody. Vertiball is now SimBody. If you head on over to their website, simbody.com, you're going to get all the great products that you know and love, including the SimBody Vertiroller and the Vertiball that you have seen most likely here in studio. Look at that. Place it, lock it, attach it, Vertiball, all sorts of great stuff over there if you want to roll out those old tired muscles and you don't want to go with that old lacrosse ball. They're also coming out with that very new product that you can see right in front of you. And if I head on over to my cart, look at that. I've already got a Vertiball over there. Little bit of a deal right there. And if you hit the try for 60 days risk-free, use the promo code FNP and you're going to get 10% off your order. With that code FNP at simbody.com, you're really helping out another local company here in New Brunswick, Canada. Can't wait for it. The new name, SimBody at simbody.com. And as we always say, let's get into it.
A last look at the big card. Be sure to head into the chat and have your say. Let's get into it and join in Fight Night Picks ? Kicks.
On y va avec Fight Night Picks, UFC Fight Night, Krylov versus Spann. Matt, this week we are apart again, but it's not due to a cold because Ale Montreal. Matt, I'm away this weekend, which is kind of going to delay a little bit of the UFC 285 stuff that you would have seen in the intro to the show. But we're really looking forward to a busy week and some busy fights. Matt Bartholomew of Haywood hitting us up with the €10 super chat saying, let's get into it. That is much appreciated from Bartholomew of Haywood. And Matt, again, when it does come down to this card, a couple of housekeeping notes before we really dive into it. The fact that Jose Johnson's supposed to be in a big time matchup. I was really looking forward to that fight that he was supposed to have on the card. Johnson is out, and ultimately Haley Cowan Brennan is out of her matchup with Eileen Perez. So we lose that one. A couple of fights we were looking forward to on the undercard. This was supposed to be 13 total fights. Now we're down to 11. So your percentages of the fights you get wrong and you get right, those can really be affected when we start to lose some of these fights. Corey McGregor's hanging out in the chat. Lord Nikon saying smash the like. Prince Vegeta's son. Who else do we have? Ultimate Expert Analyst Scott B. A lot of people tuning in, Matt, on this Saturday afternoon, getting ready for the fight cards. I know you've got the Toronto Raptors probably on in the background.
They just won, luckily.
Canadians don't really pronounce it that way. So you got the Toronto Raptors going on in the background. Montreal featuring prominently for me. Matt, what say you about this card? I know you're down for it.
It's a pretty fun card. Here's the thing. I was kind of down on the card when we had initially broken it down because, let's be honest, it doesn't necessarily have the biggest of names on it, but the few big fights that we do get, they are pretty important for the divisions. We talked about it a lot. If Augusto Sakai loses today, it's probably it.
It's
not
Bellator.
For a lot of people. Exactly. For a lot of people, that might not mean a lot. But Augusto Sakai was a really talented fighter in this division not that long ago. So his fall from grace has been very sudden and somewhat surprising. And in the co-main event and main event, there are two divisions that are wide open. And anytime you have divisions that are wide open, having ranked fighters or near-ranked fighters fighting is always a great thing to have. I think Krylov versus Ryan Spann is going to give us a lot more answers to the 205-pound division because right now there's a lot of fighters who have kind of a half declare on a title shot. Right now we have a brand new champion. Like, you don't really know who's going to be in there next with a guy like Jamal Hill. So I think Nikita Krylov and Ryan Spann is going to be a really fun fight. And hopefully it's a fight where it can be a fight of the night quality fight. It gets two guys who probably don't have the biggest of names, a little bit more stock, because I think it's going to really deliver for the fans. I do.
I think that Sakai versus Mays is going to hit like Poirier's Louisiana style Creole Maple. Now, I haven't tried it yet. See, I told you I had something in the back pocket if you didn't check my Twitter. But I feel like that main event's going to hit like Poirier's KO edition. So when I get back, yes, you're definitely going to get a shot at trying them because I really did like just this regular Louisiana hot sauce. And I think it should be a good time with this main event. Bartholomew of Haywood. Blanchfield did a number on Andrade. Oh, that much is true. Clay is hanging out over there in the chat and everybody loving to have a say about these fights. If you've never tuned in for Fight Night Picks ? Kicks, A, we thank you. But B, the format of the show, we're going to go from bottom all the way through the top. We're going to chat a little bit about these matchups. Nobody was missing weight, so we don't really have to worry about much there. Everybody showed up in shape and on weight, so that's always good. We're going to talk about some possible fight of the nights that we see on this card. And realistically, Matt, the card does start off with a fight of the night. I don't know why this is the first fight on the card. I find this absolutely insane, but we've seen the UFC kind of move away from card placement in these strategic locations to just kind of, apropos with the Quebec. It's a little bit of a melo, if we can say it that way, with the way that they're putting fighters on this card. This fight is absolutely amazing because for Nurullo Aliev, he's making his UFC debut. Tajik fans are all over this friggin' guy in the comments. They've been since the video dropped, just a single video. But for Alves, Matt, we touched on this. He has a win over a good UFC fighter who's on a run in Mark Chikasi. He dropped the top 15 fighter. He had a really competitive fight where he won a round against Drew Dober, and Dober and Ismagulov both ranked in the top 15, although Ismagulov, we know that he is retired, so a little odd there with the rankings. But when you do focus in on this matchup, Matt, like I'll say this, and I don't normally go this way. I picked Nurullo Aliev to win this fight, but I'm sure I said at the start of the week, I would not be surprised in the slightest if Alves goes out there and finishes Aliev, because Aliev, when he strikes, is liable to getting hit. He leaves his chin completely out there. He blocks with his hands down, and his hands go even further down as the fights go on. Now, why did I pick him? Because his chain grappling is great, and I really do like that ground and pound, that heavy nature. He's just a wet blanket against his opponents, and I do, think that he might have a higher propensity to win this fight, but honest to goodness, like, I do have a hard time trying to pick this fight. And if somebody came tee-hee snickering at the end, like, you guys didn't pick Alves, you don't know anything about fighting, I would counter that quite a bit, because I think you're not a turkey at all for picking either one of these fighters.
I like a sink or swim fight personally. Like, this fight for Aliev is a lot like this season for Tua with the Dolphins, like with all the weapons that he had. It was, hey, if you look really good, well, that's good. You're put in a position to succeed. If you don't look good, okay, it's over. Like, you're never going to look better than you will right now. So for Aliev, I do like that the UFC is giving him a very difficult initial matchup, because Aliev showed tremendous promise on the regional scene. And at only 23 years of age, if he can start to make improvements in his striking game, to at least chain his striking with his grappling in a somewhat more effective manner, he could be a real handful for a lot of guys in this top 15 and in the division in general for years to come. The thing about Alves is, for all the positives that you bring up about how he won a round off Drew Dober, about how he can look so good, he is so explosive, it can start to become a detriment at a certain point. That's what I worry about with Alves. I just worry about him doing a lot of those big explosive movements early on. And the thing about him too is he does have very good grappling at getting back up to his feet, but those are big explosive movements when he does go for them. So Aliev can start to break down some of the risk, control the risk, really break him down and force Alves to waste a lot of his energy defensively grappling. I do tend to favor Aliev if this fight starts to go later.
So a couple of things about this matchup, and over there on Facebook, because on these live shows, Matt, when we're away, StreamYard, you can throw it on Twitter, you can throw it on Facebook. So why the heck not? Why would I not do it? AZ Max, sup dudes, Yakapurtle is the GOAT. Matt,
You're darn right,
he is the GOAT. I did watch that game. We were talking about that actually before we came on here. When you look at Aliev, I see the comment there from Isaiah saying that Nurullo is Hussein all over again, Alves with the Brazilian flag. He's not like Hussein Ashkabov. I threw the red flags up there last week and took Jamal Emmers because, to me, Ashkabov didn't really have those intangibles. Plus, he had a 3-year layoff. Aliev just fought this past summer. He beat Josh Wick, the former BTC champ, who came in on really short notice, and Aliev was a giant favorite. But when you look at this one, Matt, we'll have a look at the Fight Night Picks votes, try and give us an idea on it. And if you go over to our Instagram page, Matt, 61% with Aliev to get the win, 39% with Alves. Again, Alves has fought some really good competition, and he's looked good against that competition. And he's had a really tidy winning streak since about 2017, 2016. I think Alves is the better striker in the matchup. I think Alves has the better jiu-jitsu in the matchup. But for me, I look at it, for the Asian Combat Sambo champion, Nurullo Aliev, I think he can go out there, get the takedown, continue with it. But again, very volatile matchup and no strong, argument for either guy.
And this is what I like about, like what I said, a kind of a sink or swim fight for a promising prospect. If Aliev loses, who cares? You know? Like, that's the great thing about MMA. You don't have to have an undefeated record for people to care about you when you're the champion. And if you lose to a guy like Alves, okay, you get to go back to the drawing board and improve upon one of the weaknesses that you do have. Like, that's why I like this fight. If you win, then now we know exactly how good you are. And if you lose, well, that's fine. You lost to a very talented fighter, and you should get better because of it.
Chris P saying lots of live dogs on this card. This is definitely one of those, with Alves taking on Aliev. Both of us going with Aliev. The next fight, Matt, Carl Deaton III. A little bit of bad blood taking on Joe Solecki. Deaton III taking this fight on short notice, Matt. And for Joe Solecki, I mean, he has some very credible wins in the UFC. We touched on at the start of the week. I mean, Jim Miller's probably the biggest one among them. And if you do look at the overall record for both these guys, even for Deaton the third, I mean, second to last fight was against Justin James, the Guitar Hero. So a very, very interesting fight there for Deaton. He showed off some really well-rounded skills in that fight, defended takedowns. He was able to go out there and strike quite well. And even if he did get taken down, he was on the mat. He was able to sweep himself back up to his feet. Might be a little difficult against the guy who is the wet blanket grappler. And I know you were kind of touching on that at the start of the week. Kurtar is saying in the comments section, if Solecki can't finish this dude, he should get cut. And Chandler's saying, fun fact, Jesse Smith, the guy Carl Deaton beat, was going to fight prior to getting the UFC call this weekend, is one of my teacher's ex-boyfriends. Jesse Smith.
Wow.
Out there playing the game with the teacher. So, Matt, when you do look at this matchup, Carl Deaton the third taking on Joe Solecki, again, when it does come back down to it, Deaton's one of those guys that from the outside, he's definitely the better striker than Joe Solecki. That's not a very controversial thing to say. If you've seen Carl Deaton strike, Solecki's going to have boxing combinations, but a little bit more of a reset to it, a little bit slower, a little bit less of, a zip to his shots as a guy like Deaton. But the thing that I didn't really like about Deaton in some of his fights was he stands really pressure heavy on his toes, like on his front foot, and he's an orthodox fighter. So he's liable to getting kicked. He doesn't check leg kicks. He doesn't then switch stances to check the leg kick. And when he does decide to throw, he puts his head into it and then leans out with punches. So he is one of those guys that as he progresses, or if he progresses in the UFC, he could get countered on. I do like Joe Solecki with that wet blanket grappling, but as Lord Nikon says, too big of a step up for Deaton IMO. It is a tough fight for Carl Deaton on short notice.
It is, and that's why I have Joe Solecki. Like, there's not a lot to talk about in this fight. Like, I said this a lot at the start of the week. You would mention it. Like, Joe Solecki's not a lot of people's favorite fighter. He's a good fighter, but it's just his style's not the most entertaining to watch. He's going to get on top of you. He's going to hold you down. He's going to be frustrating. He'll get that back control, be very dominant from those positions, but it's not from a position of, like, dominance like a Jacare Souza, where you're going to see this crazy level of ground and pound into a submission. So it would be nice to see Solecki get a finish in this fight. Maybe that's kind of what I'm most curious about, to see how good he is able to look with his grappling. But I do think his wrestling is enough of an advantage for him to get into the positions that he needs to have success.
And really eager to see who leads the dance in this one, because if both guys decide to fight in a mirror, it could be a boring fight. Because if you look at it for Joe Solecki, I mean, this fight was announced on, a week and a day's notice that Benoit Saint-Denis, the God of War, was out of the fight with Solecki. In steps Deaton, and you'd have to think with Solecki versus Saint-Denis, I don't know who a person would pick to win in that fight without doing any tape study. I'd say Benoit's going to initiate a takedown. We'll see where it goes from there. But with a guy like Benoit, it's going to be action. He's going to meet in the center of the cage. You have to wonder, did Solecki just really kind of go out there and train his boxing for a fight against a guy like Saint-Denis? Does he rest on his laurels with his grappling at a Gym O? Really interesting stuff there. Again, for me, I do have Joe Solecki. As Malone Hart hits us up with a big-time super chat. Sorry for missing the show the last couple of weeks. Keep doing great work. So much appreciated from Malone Hart with a giant super chat. The MVP of the show. Clay is saying Saint-Denis to beat Solecki. So yeah, really tough one there. But both of us going with Solecki in the matchup. Should be a fun fight. And then Matt, Charles Johnson, last guy to step in on the scale. Chris Montsville saying Johnson looks sick on the scales, bad weight cut. I don't know, but he was the last guy to step in. And so you have Charles Johnson taking on Ode Osbourne. Now, we made a mistake with this fight, Matt, at the start of the week. So we have to get that one out of the gate, because we said with Ode Osbourne, he's got this record. He's 6-3 at bantamweight. He's 3-0 with a no contest at featherweight. But at flyweight, he's 2-2. And we focused most of our video around the fact that, listen, the weight cut to 125, probably a little difficult, this and that. And for Charles Johnson, this is a short notice fight, because it wasn't originally supposed to be Johnson. It was supposed to be Denis Bondar. And about 10 days ago, this fight was made official. So Johnson then had to travel all the way across the world, because he was back training at Tiger Muay Thai in Thailand. Takes the fight, last guy to weigh in. It's a catch weight of 130 pounds. Both guys made the limit, but difficult for Charles Johnson to take that, to have to cut that weight on the short notice. And B, for Ode Osbourne, 5 less pounds to cut. So that has to play a little bit to the advantage of an Ode Osbourne getting ready to cut down to 125, which was a big point that we had in the video, questioning a little bit of the durability at 125.
If anybody tells you they have a good read on Ode Osbourne, look them dead in the eyes and tell them they're a liar. Because, like,
Well, I think
his
I have a good
record,
read in the fact that he seems like the nicest man in the world.
okay, that's fine. But, like, if you look at his record, so you lose to Brian Kelleher, Manel Kopp, and Tyson Nam. Those are all really talented and explosive strikers who could beat pretty much anybody on their best day. But your wins, they're over Jerome Rivera, who didn't look great in the UFC. Let's just call it what it is. CJ Vergara, who is a well-rounded fighter, but again, not a top guy by any means. And Zaruk Adeshev, who I thought was going to win that fight. But Zaruk Adeshev's not very good. Like, he did not have a great MMA record, much more of a kickboxer. So Ode Osbourne is just, he's in the middle there somewheres. And that's why it's so difficult to predict a lot of his fights. He has tremendous power when he is able to land his own boxing combinations. We've seen that multiple times throughout his UFC tenure. But the problem is, his own reach can become a bit of a disadvantage to him. If you're able to get on the inside and make him feel a little bit uncomfortable, he isn't the best at moving his feet after you do crash that distance. And I think that's going to be a position where he does struggle with in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, Ode Osbourne, out of both fighters, incredibly creative. He definitely has finishes on his record that we've seen, but finishes that can translate well into this one. And for Osbourne, only 3 of his 17 total fights have gone to decision. Those fights are against CJ Vergara, Isaac Galloway, and Sanchez. So a lot of fights and a lot of them finishing. And then when you do consider it for Charles Johnson, we talk about it every single time. I mean, it was from his time as the LFA flyweight champ, but he's a 5-round fighter because he continues to fight at a pace throughout those rounds. Now, when I look at this fight for Johnson, short notice, last guy to weigh in, 130. I hope he doesn't fight like a John Castaneda did against Daniel Santos because, hey, John Castaneda, he can fight for 3 rounds. He's really, really consistent in all of his performances. I know exactly what I'm going to get out of Sexy Mexi. He has a great first round, and then in the second round, he's spent, completely spent. So I still will go with Charles Johnson in this matchup. I look at the fan vote on this one, 70% going with Johnson at Fight Night Picks, 30% with Ode Osbourne. But again, this is a really tough fight to try and make a prediction on.
It is. And again, for Ode Osbourne, I've never really had a great read on him. I can openly admit that because he is a bit of a glass cannon at a lower weight class. That's not often like an archetype we really see down there. Like when you think about a fighter like that, you think of a Jimmy Manawa, you think of an Alistair Overeem, big fighters with tons of power. But for Ode Osbourne, he does kind of suffer from the same durability issues. But again, he possesses that great power. So if he was able to go out there, hurt really at any moment throughout the fight, because that's the thing about Ode Osbourne. He does have good snap to his shots, but I just think Johnson, like you said, his output's so good. He's so consistent for those 3 rounds that I don't really think Johnson's going to fall off and kind of lose himself defensively.
Well, see how it goes for both of these guys. Doughboy Paul saying pop and popcorn fight. That's definitely true. We move into the next one, Matt. We have Jordan Leavitt taking on Victor Martinez. V-Mart, everybody heard about that. But this one, another one of those fights that is kind of on short notice. Now, this fight was booked for last year. Martinez falls out. Leavitt continues to fight. Leavitt's last fight was Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. And for Victor Martinez, he hasn't competed since Dana White's Contender Series 2021. But again, Matt, I know a lot of people are down on some of these cards because there's 13 Dana White's Contender Series veterans on it. And it's like, we're really cutting the cost to have some of these fighters on these cards. You only have 3 ranked fighters.
I just watched the ESPN 30 for 30, the year of the scab.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, it's starting to get to that level to where you're like, oh, they're just.
However, Victor Martinez, to say some nice things about him, his striking is much better than Jordan Leavitt's. And last thing, I like Leavitt, but his striking is sad. I would expect that Jordan Leavitt's going to continue to get better at striking at Syndicate. He's trained there for a very long time. His grappling's very, very good. His single leg is great with his takedowns. Victor Martinez struggles against takedowns and single legs in particular, and that's why I have Jordan Leavitt in the matchup. However, now Mark Crowley's saying, I don't see Leavitt having any success with his takedowns. Martinez's boxing will score enough points to carry the day and potentially get Leavitt out of there. I don't necessarily disagree with it. Like, with Victor Martinez, really good boxing, really good power on his boxing. And yeah, does he get hit and drop in some of his fights? Sure. Does he have porous takedown defense? Sure. Victor Martinez is one of those guys that could come in and maybe shock some people based on the fact that Leavitt's already got a giant performance bonus and a huge highlight reel from the Matt Wyman fight. And he's already a 5-fight UFC veteran.
Which is kind of wild because it feels like Jordan Leavitt entered the UFC like 6 months ago. But I just think his grappling is much more dominant than any one-punch power Victor Martinez does bring into this fight. And that's something you do have to worry about. But unless Martinez can really make Leavitt pay for his entries and for some of his attempts on the inside, I don't think Martinez is going to be able to consistently out-grapple him defensively with a lot of the takedown attempts Leavitt's going to go for. Because, like you said, goes for that high crotch single leg a lot, and he will chain off of that one takedown attempt. So it's exhausting stuff to try to just defend off of. And that's the thing, too. You have to focus on defending the takedown. It's difficult to get an arm free to do any kind of damage. So for those reasons, I do favor Jordan Leavitt.
Well, we'll see how he makes out too, because if you look at it for Victor Martinez, he trains with Carlos Diego Ferreira, a guy who's really going to get you ready for a matchup like this, as well as the guys at Fortis MMA. When you look at the total votes on this one, Matt, at Fight Night Picks, 85% going with Jordan Leavitt. So both of us with Leavitt in the matchup, but a great opportunity for Victor Martinez with some of that boxing. And then we move into a matchup, Matt, and we talk about the Canadians as I drop my cellular device. But we have the first of three Canadians on the matchup, Jasmine Jasudavicius taking on Gabriella Fernandes. And when we talked about Fernandes, one of the things that I completely forgot to talk about, and then as soon as we taped the video, I thought, shoot, I meant to mention that, is the fact that she's a surf instructor and she's a boxing coach at the gym that she belongs to. So for Gabriella Fernandes, I don't know if the surfing necessarily kind of translates into MMA, but the boxing definitely does from that southpaw stance. She's really tricky on the outside. She's usually moving laterally around the cage and making a big difference in her fights. She struggles with the takedown defense. Kind of a similar thing to Victor Martinez in her last fight. With Jasmine, advancements in her striking for sure. She kind of chases the fight sometimes in the UFC. We saw it in CFFC as well. But with Jasudavicius, I mean, a Canadian, what was she? Commonwealth silver medalist in wrestling. And that's definitely a hallmark of her game, especially in a matchup like this. I would expect it to be. You muted yourself. Oh boy.
Wow. I got to call you out last week, but now you got one over on me. So I do favor Jasmine's wrestling in this matchup, and I really do think this is an oil and water kind of fight, because if she is just rushing into the exchanges on the outside, she's probably going to get lit up every single time. I just don't think that the advancements that she has been able to make are going to be able to make up for A, the kicking distance, or B, the combinations that Fernandes is probably going to throw when she is throwing her hands, because Jasmine's going to throw rushes, I would say, more than combinations. Her feet aren't necessarily set while she's doing it. And for those reasons, I do think she is going to have to crash her way into a lot of her own takedown attempts, but I think it will be enough for her to just secure a lot of time on top. And I do think that's what this fight's primarily going to come down to. I don't really expect either woman to get a finish in this matchup. And I do think Jasmine's wrestling and clinch control are going to be able to get her enough points. Now, is that a great way to predict a fight? Is that what you feel great about? Not really, but I do see that being a path that she could follow to get the win.
Well, I mean, when you look at this one, 54% at Fight Night Picks going with Gabriella Fernandes to get the win. And I still do have her in the matchup. Again, I think she has a definite striking advantage. It's kind of another one of those weird fights. I mean, it's a get back on the horse fight for Jasudavicius. She struggled against the southpaw striking of Natalia Silva. We didn't know what Silva was going to look like in a fight like this. It looks like Fernandes is now a slight favorite in the fight. I do like the striking out of somebody in Fernandes, and I think she can have the exact same type of advantages that Silva was able to do, because Silva, defended 6 of the takedowns. I don't know if Fernandes is going to be able to do that. That obviously pokes a hole in my argument. But when you look at somebody like Fernandes, every round starting out on the feet, if she can point and also get out of the way, I think she has much better footwork in this matchup. I'm going to go with Fernandes. But again, for Jasudavicius, one of those big things out of the fight week is that she's really been talking about the fact that she got some good rounds in at American Top Team with Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So we'll see how that translates in this fight. And Clay is saying, I'm hoping to go with you need to do damage scoring, in which case Jasmine is SOL. So we'll see how that goes. But Clay, you're going to like you just got to do damage in the fight between the Ghost Pepper Erick Gonzalez and Trevor Peek of No Fix nickname from Alabama, United States. Matt, for Trevor Peek, he gets in barn burners. I don't think he knows anything other than barn burners. And I talked about it in the video at the start of the week, the fact that his main training partner is Torres Finney, a 4-0 middleweight that knocks guys out. And that's his main sparring partner. So awesome to see out of him. For Erick Gonzalez, switched up his camp to CMMA. That's the Josh Barnett gym. Obviously, Matt's favorite fighter, La Mangusta, trains out of that gym. Victor Henry. So definitely a big gym to be fighting out of. I love this fight. Man, Prince Vegeta's son Fernandes just looks so angry. Even in his interviews, like he knows he's got to make a change. He got a mental coach into this one, really trying to break things down. Obviously, he's 0-2 in the UFC, but those are some pretty tough fighters to just give Erick Gonzalez fights with, right?
They
Here's
are, but
Terrence McKinney and Jim Miller. Have fun.
he has a lot of experience, though, is the weird thing. So, like, what else are you going to do? Give him a guy who's like 8-0? Because he's got twice the amount of fights as they do. Like, that's the weird thing about Erick Gonzalez. He wasn't like some shiny prospect when he fought Jim Miller. It was like, hey, we found a guy to fight Jim Miller. Hopefully he's good. And he made a good account of himself. Like, that was an exciting fight for as long as it lasted. But Erick Gonzalez has terrible striking defense, and it has been an issue for him, I would say, his entire career. And against a guy like Trevor Peek, who possesses such incredible fight-ending power that he does, I just don't know how Gonzalez is going to be able to hold up to the type of power that Peek lands with. Now, if Gonzalez is able to go for a lot of takedown attempts, hide his chin and hide his head in some positional areas, I think he could do a decent job at least making this fight past the first round, past the second round. It could get interesting the later it goes. I just think Gonzalez at some point throughout this fight is going to get hit by a big shot. And I do think Peek has enough power to probably put him away if he does hit him with that one shot.
Well, I mean, Erick Gonzalez is able to go out there and put Jim Miller on skates in the first round of their fight. And in the first round against Terrence McKinney, his striking defense looked like much improved. He was consciously getting those hands up, getting out of the pocket, which then opened up the takedown for Terrence McKinney. And that was the issue for Erick Gonzalez. As the commentary team said, Erick Gonzalez, he should go for the wrestling. He should go for the takedown. That was a silly thing to say against Terrence McKinney, who's a very good wrestler. But when you look at it for Trevor Peek, yeah, I mean, I see some people saying maybe there's a little bit of buyer's remorse, this and that. Trevor Peek's fights in his career, 2 have finished in the second round, the rest in the first round. His fight against Malik Lewis, Malik beat the brakes off him for the majority of the first round. And in the last minute and a half, Malik started to tire, and Trevor Peek was able to pull away. And then in the second round with the tired Malik Lewis, that's when he was able to go out there and get the finish. So really tough one there if you're trying to make a pick, because both these guys are finishers to the nth degree. I have Trevor Peek, 71% at Fight Night picks going with Peek to get the win. But yeah, Matt, this should be fireworks. This was our fight of the night on the Fight of the Night screen at the start of the week. And that's where it's at. All right, Matt.
Oh, well, then sure. We'll move in. I'm very excited.
We'll move into a matchup with a couple of Canadiens. And when it comes down to it, I mean, I'm pretty close by. Johan Lainez, he's from Varennes. I'm in the middle. He's on the South Shore, but he's in Vegas. So, Matt, when it comes down to it, Johan Lainez, the White Lion, he is a finisher to the nth degree. Mike Malott is as well, as I don't pronounce the K in Mike Malott, and I just say my Malott. So, my Maria, Mike Malott, big time opportunity here for proper Mike Malott. The one loss on his record was it featherweight when he missed featherweight in World Series against Mean Hakeem Dawodu. So a big time surge for Malott. And since he's kind of come back into the fold of competing every once in a while, he's looked very, very good. Now, he tends to have to get hit to get into fights, which is not a good thing against Johan Lainez, who hits like a truck from the outside. So I love the matchup. And for Mike Malott, I didn't mention it. I had it in the graphic that he trained at a House of Champions. That's Kyle Nelson's gym. Looks like he spent a little bit of his camp kind of doubling with Kyle Nelson, who was getting ready for Doo Ho Choi, who managed to draw on that fight. Can you believe it for Kyle Nelson? Biggest fight of his life. But for Mike Malott, a great shot. And for Johan Lainez out of, Académie Connexion with Pat Cote, pretty big gym there too. So cool stuff out of the Canadians in this one.
It's great that a Canadian's going to get a win today, but it's also terrible that one has to lose too. And this should be a really entertaining fight for as long as it lasts. So hopefully it does boost the stock of the winner quite considerably, because I do think this will be a very entertaining fight to watch. Like you said, if Johan Lainez is able to land some of those single shots that he can, they are as close to fight ending as you could possibly get to. But the weird thing about Lainez is he's not a fast striker. He's a very powerful one, and the technique is very good behind his shots, but he doesn't necessarily have one-of-one hand speed by any means, and I think that might be an issue for him in this matchup against a guy like Malott, who does like to get on the inside before he starts to throw a lot of his combinations, and with a guy like Lainez, he has great power at that really long range, but he doesn't deal with pressure all that well, and I think that's really going to be the important part of this fight. If Lainez the one moving forward, could he win this fight? Of course he could, but if you notice him backing up, especially early on in the fight, that's not a great sign.
Well, the thing that weirds me out, like Neon Bones talking about Malott has to fight intelligently, grappling and wild exchanges, mixing the grappling, he can get the win. Johan Lainez is a fairly formidable grappler, and he definitely has a size advantage in this fight. He's a massive welterweight. And the other thing that I see out of there in the comments section, first thing, Morphitrix saying Malott needs more tattoos if he wants to make it in the UFC. Dan Hooker made it for a really long time until he popped that cherry and got that giant back piece. And the second part of it is John Kalachak saying Malott will fight smart on the outside for the first and the second. Lainez will gas and Malott will begin to take over IMO. The only counter that I'll have to that, John, is I could definitely agree with that. But Mike Malott's never won a fight that's gone on outside of the first round. So he's got a decision against Thomas Dang back in 2015. Other than that, first round finish, like all sorts of first round finishes. I definitely think Mike Malott possesses those qualities. For me, the reason why I do have Malott, I think he has a speed advantage. He can go out there, pop, and get out of the pocket. He seems to have really good footwork. But the thing that scares me is he tends to back up, bite down in the mouthpiece. And against a guy like Lainez, you could get hit in a fight like that. So it really is tricky that way. We'll have a look. 76% of the fans at Fight Night Picks going with, Malott. So for you, you've got Malott, but Johan Lainez, man, he's a fun fighter to watch for sure, especially if you want to go back and watch the fight with Gabe Green.
Oh, 100%. That was a wild fight for as long as it lasted. But that's the big issue with Lainez. He just doesn't deal with pressure all that well. Now, if he is the one moving forward, it's a really dangerous fight for Malott because Lainez has incredible power, really good technique, like I said. But I could agree with you more. I just think the speed difference in this fight is probably going to be the X factor between these two guys.
Steven saying Johan is a good dog. He is a white lion. Matt the Mummy Cats with the super chat. Stay locked in, boys, from Big Daddy Cold Cuts and the boys. Listen, I was that guy. Make sure you check out the Mummy Cats. I am in their new music video for Wolverine. It was a lot of fun to do. It's a really cool music video to go back and watch. So make sure you check that out from the Mummy Cats. A thank you for the super chat. A lot of fun there, and a great song that I roll on the regular. So a really good one right there. Matt, Tatiana Suarez, Montana De La Rosa. I have not seen a single promo for Montana De La Rosa all this week. And truth be told, I've been away all week and all weekend, like for a full week. So I haven't really had a chance to look at much. But I'll tell you one thing. I have seen so much promo for Tatiana Suarez in this fight. It's not even funny. And if she loses, I don't know what the UFC does to recover. The promotional dollars are in Tatiana Suarez's court.
Well, yeah. When she left, she was the number one contender.
Number two.
And she was the number two contender and hadn't had a competitive fight up until the third round against Nina Nunes. So, like, yeah, it makes sense. And Tatiana Suarez checks all the boxes, too. Like, she speaks extremely well, so no wonder the UFC wants to have her. Like, she does a lot of broadcast work and whatnot. Tatiana Suarez is a really good ambassador for the sport. But this is a really difficult matchup for Montana De La Rosa. We compared it a lot to the Carla Esparza fight that Tatiana Suarez had, and I think that is the closest matchup that she has had, or at least opponent that she has already fought, who matched up the most similar with Montana De La Rosa, a primary wrestler who's a very talented one at that. Like, Carla Esparza is a two-time women's strawweight champion at the UFC level, and she is a primary wrestler. Tatiana Suarez made it look like she had never wrestled a single day in her life. I just think when you want to beat someone like Suarez, you wrestling is probably not the best path to victory because they're like a 10 out of 10 in the wrestling. If you want to beat Tatiana Suarez, you have to be able to defend the takedowns and then expose her, I would say, lacking striking. But the thing about Suarez is her boxing isn't terrible. Like, she's not a bad defensive fighter by any means. It's just if she does tend to tire, she's not really used to a lot of those positions, especially in the third round. So you do worry about her in some of those spots. I just don't think Montana De La Rosa is going to be able to offer up enough takedown defense initially. So I think we're just going to see a lot of Suarez in that top position.
Yeah, and I mean, I think at 125, like Suarez kind of touched on it in some of those interviews, the one that she did with Helen Yee that I had listened to. She touched on the fact that, listen, I had to gain a little bit of weight in my legs to try and rehab the knee injury. And obviously knee injuries, neck injuries, they've been huge for Tatiana Suarez. But like you said, she was the number two contender before she went away. It was a neck issue that forced her kind of away from the pursuit of her dreams. Like, I sound like I'm talking real meta here, but with the Olympics in 2012, that kind of got her into MMA. We know how good her MMA wrestling is. You saw those 9 takedowns against Esparza. She was able to go out there and get the finish against Nina Nunes, held her down for the majority of a couple of rounds. And
Who's fighting for the title next week?
At what, 125? Alexa Grasso, yeah.
Tatiana Suarez
I don't know that one.
just destroyed her. Alexa's just
Alexa doesn't know about it
now. But she destroyed her. That fight wasn't close at all. She took her down immediately, got her back, choked her out. Grasso is a good fighter. And for Suarez to go out there and just make it look, again, pretty much academic, like it was surprising to see at the time. But the thing about Suarez is there's prospects out there who get wins and they look good doing it. Suarez was dominant and finishing people while looking dominant. That's really important for you to get those finishes on your way up. And that's the thing about Suarez. She's not just a wrestler like Joe Solecki who's going to get into that top position and hold on to it. Like Suarez is looking for the finish with a lot of her grappling.
Yeah, and I mean, it was Prince Vegeta earlier giving us that super chat saying, hey, loving it. That's much appreciated. In the matchup, I do have Tatiana Suarez. I'm not going to bring up the Instagram votes. It is what it is.
Pretty long.
It just depends on how she's been able to progress through those injuries and what we see in a matchup like this. But for me, when she is standing for Suarez, it's a lot of those side kicks, not like Manafiaro, but she will throw to the body to then kind of keep her opponent at bay with her own striking. De La Rosa will box and she keeps it really tight and crisp, but she needs to close the distance. Suarez can keep the distance with her kicks. And then when the distance is closed, I can see Suarez going out there and getting the takedown. But Matt, what I don't know, what the heck's going to happen between Augusto Sakai? And I said it at the start of the week. I've gotten, I think, every Augusto Sakai fight wrong for like 5 straight fights. I'll be completely honest with everybody because just when I think Augusto's going to do it again, he goes out there and he lets me down. And I like watching Augusto Sakai fight and vice versa. I do enjoy watching a Don'Tale Mayes fight because of the grappling advantages he has over certain fighters with his judo, but he does have good boxing. He definitely has great training partners down at Jackson Wink. But when I look at a matchup like this, Matt, for Sakai, how hard have the 4 TKO losses in a row weighed on him? And what the heck are we going to see out of him in this matchup? It really is hard to predict, especially when both these guys at the start of the week, they were sitting around par in a matchup like this. With the recently ranked Augusto Sakai, he was ranked as high as 9th after his win over Blagoy Ivanov, which is controversial.
Augusto Sakai right now is at that weird part of like Marc Gasol's career where he went to the Lakers and it was like the worst thing ever. I'm happy he didn't want to stay with the Raptors because he was well past his prime by that point. My whole point is Marc Gasol played for like 20 years. He was good for like 18 and a half of those years, but the last year and a half was terrible. Is Augusto Sakai just completely fallen off? Now, I do think if there is anything left in the tank, his skill set should be very disruptive to Don'Tale Mayes'. Augusto Sakai is the much bigger fighter frame-wise. He is, well, not necessarily because Don'Tale Mayes has height, but Sakai, you feel his physicality more when he's in there. He's going to throw with a lot more volume when he is on his game too, and I think that's really going to be the key. I'll be curious to see what the volume numbers are at the end of the first round because I think it's one of those deals where, let's say Sakai throws 30 significant strikes and he's out there looking quite comfortable, then he's probably, you hate to use this word, but he would very much be a lock after that point to just look really good because you would like the confidence that you're seeing. But if after the first round, Augusto Sakai's thrown like 4 significant strikes and we're just seeing him backing up a lot, it's probably not going to look good in the second and the third round after that. So for Sakai, I really do think it's going to come down to how confident is he in this matchup.
Yeah, it's a really, really tough one. I mean, for Don'Tale Mayes, like we saw that weird fight where he was the loser against Hamdi Abdel Wahab in his last time out. Never thought he would have lost that fight, but he did. And Hamdi happened to be on just a Hamdi Damdi roll of USADA supplements that are not allowed. And when you look at it for Augusto Sakai, the skills are still there. I mean, can he strike moving forward? Sure. Can he throw good volume? Sure. Does he have zip at the end of those cardio kickboxing shots? Yeah. He tends to be a heavyweight that doesn't land with a ton of power, but the volume numbers are there. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. We don't really see that at heavyweight, but Sakai could do that. Don'Tale Mayes, it's got to be a lot of pressure. It's got to be a lot of clinch control, maybe some takedowns. So we'll see how this one plays out. I know a lot of people are down on Sakai because of the fight they had against Alistair Overeem, and they remember round 3, round 4. As that fight went on, what happened? Round 3, round 4, Alistair, he wore. And he just went out there and wore him down with a lot of the takedowns. But when you look at it for Sakai, don't forget, he won the first 2 rounds of that fight. So for me...
The problem was, since he won those first 2 rounds, he looked so bad in 3 and 4. And that's the problem with Sakai. Like, if you win early rounds, that's fine. but you can win the battle and lose the war overall. Like, that's why I don't get too caught up in winning single rounds here or there, especially early on in a fight, because a lot of fighters can go out there, blow everything they have cardio-wise in that first round and win it, seal it on the scorecards, but then they have nothing left to offer after that initial round.
It's a tricky fight for sure, and a crossroads for both these guys in their careers. And then we get into a very interesting fight. Now, this has rankings potential for Brendan Allen because Andrea Muniz is currently ranked at 11th. And when you look at the matchup, you have a couple of guys that have fought similar skilled opponents. Like, we've seen Andrea Muniz go out there and fight some very well-rounded guys. We've seen Brendan Allen fight a lot of southpaws, and I saw it out there. So Dan Tom did throw it out there on Twitter with the southpaw striking report. And I went through some of the wins that Allen had in the UFC or against UFC caliber guys. Tom Breeze, Dawkins, Robertson, who else? Puna Soriano, Sam Alvey, and Krzysztof Jotko. All of those wins against UFC level southpaws. So a good opportunity to go out there again against the southpaw. Now, we've seen from Muniz, he's been able to use a little bit of striking to then open up some of the grappling. Like, I think of a similar skill set type of matchup to when Andrea Muniz fought Erick Anders. And it was quite a bit of a barn burner until Muniz was able to go out there and snatch things up and make it work for himself. And he had to adjust through positions. He had a lot of really interesting spots in that fight. But for Brendan Allen, much more well-rounded, much better striker. And if he can keep it on the feet, Brendan Allen can and will win this fight. Not can. He will win this fight.
It felt like Brendan Allen came to the UFC. Did the UFC just sign every LFA middleweight at like the exact same time? Because it felt like
former champ, right?
I know, but it just felt like they were like, hey, come on over. Because he just seemed to come with this big wave, but he really has to be able to differentiate himself from like the Marcus Perez's of the world and whatnot. Like, even Erick Anders was from that same class too. I guess he came over earlier, but you get the idea. My point is, Brendan Allen, like you said, is an extremely well-rounded fighter, and he was a guy who really only ever thought of him for his grappling, especially earlier on in his UFC career, because he had the good wrestling, he had the submission ability. He just wasn't really able to get it done on the feet against some of the specialists on the feet. But if you look at his last 3 fights, that's been the area of his game that I think has grown the most. And it might not be the reason why he's won every single fight, but his striking gets him the confidence to then go out there and start to achieve some of his success with his own grappling. But the problem is, Brendan Allen at his best striking is striking because he has the threat of the grappling. Andrea Muniz is cool with that, though. Like, Andrea Muniz could throw nothing but head kicks and like 360 spinning back fists all day long if you want to, because you don't care if Brendan Allen takes you down. You're a shark and that's your water. So I just think for Muniz, the one area of his game that he is so dominant with, if he's able to get it down to the ground, he's just so deadly with his submissions. And I know people might be down on him based off that last fight with Uriah Hall, because it was awful. It's not a fun fight to go back and rewatch. Like, no new MMA fans like, ooh, I really enjoyed that one. But it did show that he's able to get takedowns on a guy who has great footwork, which is difficult to take down guys down who have good footwork. And Uriah Hall's good at getting back up to his feet. Not against like Gegard Mousasi, of course, but for the most part, he can get back up to his feet. So I just think for Muniz, it may not have been the most thrilling of matchups by any means, but he was able to showcase skills that should work against other top 15 talents.
It's a really, really tricky fight, and I see a couple of people out there. So Morphatrix saying 360 watching, only 62 likes. Come on, you got to hit the likes. You definitely do have to hit the likes if you're out there. We're nearing the end of the show. If you look at it for Brendan Allen, you look at some of these wins that he has recently. Jacob Malkoun, there was a lot of wrestling exchanges in that fight. Even people that thought that Jacob Malkoun won the fight against Jotko, it was just Jotko initiated some of the grappling. Allen was able to take over. Sam Alvey got just rocked, and then he ended up getting finished. Puna Soriano, very, well-rounded type of performance out there. We got to see a little bit of the striking from Brendan Allen. Chris P saying, you guys are wrong about Allen. This kid has it. I think he's continued to progress. I actually agree with Chris P. I think he's continued to progress throughout his career. We've seen a definite uptick in his striking, but in a lot of these matchups, the only trouble I have is, he has a wrestling advantage over some fighters. He has grappling advantage with his jiu-jitsu over some fighters. It always tends to end up in those positions, though. Always. It doesn't matter who it's against. And I default back to the Kevin Holland fight. He has to get out of a bad position and then get his own finish. He wins that fight, surely. But then you look at the fight that he has against Dawkins, and he looks really good as it goes at the start. And then as the fight finishes, even in the third round, Dawkins is the one that's really having success with a lot of the grappling. So it is a tricky fight if you're trying to offer up a pick on it. At Fight Night Picks for the total vote, 68% with Andrea Muniz. Do you think we even get a finish in this fight?
I don't think Brendan Allen's going to get a finish. And this is why. I think if he hurts Muniz, he won't go to the ground with him. Because that's just the smart thing to do. Like, Muniz is one of those rare few grapplers where he truly is like a 1% of a 1%, to where if you have a guy rocked, normally you want to finish them. It's not worth it with Muniz. Like, get the ref to get him back up to his feet, then try to finish him from that spot. So it might be difficult for Allen. I can see Muniz getting tricky with his jiu-jitsu, so maybe he could get a submission win. But it is a difficult fight because both guys, they don't leave themselves in a lot of bad positions. Like, Brendan Allen against Sean Strickland had a bad performance, but for the most part, he's not a guy who sticks his chin out really far. He's not going to leave his hands wide open. You're right, he will tire in some fights. He does tend to get in some sticky positions for sure. But for the most part, like, there's not one massive weakness in his game that you can point to and say, hey, Brendan Allen really struggles with X, Y, or Z.
I'm switching my pick in the matchup, and I'm going to go with Brendan Allen.
Wow.
I've thought about it all week. I've thought about the fights that Brendan Allen has lost, and he's had a hard time out there. Recently, the fight against Chris Curtis, what happens? He starts out and he's fighting at a rhythm, but he can't really figure out the distance with Chris Curtis, and Curtis is able to go out there and land power shots. He lands the same shot pretty well that Sean Strickland was able to land. Strickland looked really good. What do both those guys do? Strike from the outside and have a ton of success. I don't necessarily see Brendan Allen at the end of the day getting himself into a really bad position, getting himself submitted. So I'm actually going to go with now all of a sudden a heavy underdog and switch my pick from Muniz over to Brendan Allen. So that's what this show's about, Matt. I had doubts throughout the week. I was sitting on the fence. I'm going to go with Brendan Allen. You've got Andre Muniz. And then we get into a fight, Matt, in this main event. If you haven't tossed the like out there yet, please do. Wild stuff going on in question mark kicks. Ryan Spann taking on Nikita Krylov. And Matt, I did throw out a lofty, preview prediction at the start of the week. If we go back to Muniz Allen for one more second, it's a fight that's not on the card anymore. What did I say? With an underdog, I said she's going to go out there and get the finish. And Eileen Perez against Haley Cowan, Brennan. The fight's off the card. So now it comes to this main event, Matt. Nikita Krylov taking on Ryan Spann. Ryan Spann, power jab against Dominic Reyes and a clubbing right hand to drop him down. Awesome win.
Left hand that knocked him out, though.
It knocked him out, and then the right hand dropped him. But when you look at the fight that he
You're
just
going
had,
good if you get knocked out.
it was, you can be knocked out on your feet, you silly goose. But it was on the main card of a pay-per-view. Now he's in the main event of a UFC fight. The last time Ryan Spann had a UFC main event was against Anthony Smith. He looked really good, and then he looked really bad. It was a topsy-turvy type of one-round fight. When you look at this matchup now, they put it out there like achieving your potential or whatever. That realizing the potential was the UFC fight on their YouTube page. Nikita Krylov, boys, it's his 18th friggin' fight in the UFC. Taking him pretty damn long to realize the potential. Now, I always liked Nikita Krylov first round in the UFC. I was surprised that he left because he had 4 wins in a row, 1 loss to Misha Serkinov, and then he was back with Fight Nights Global. He looks like the same fighter that we know and love. Like, he's a guy that used to, way back in the day, train out of Tiger Muay Thai. He's a karate black belt. His grappling's very good, but he gets himself into some chintzy positions. Don't necessarily see that against a guy like Ryan Spann. But Ryan Spann, where the conversation comes into this one, Matt, is Ryan Spann. He's dedicated himself to training. I wasn't trading hard before. I wasn't cutting the weight before. And then he shows up for his last fight and he looks great. As great as that is, he weighed 206.6 for his last fight, so he missed weight. However, for this fight, he weighs in at 205, right on the nose, championship weight. And Ryan Spann, man, again, he's continued to roll. So I love this fight, and both guys can be finishers to the nth degree, though I'd say one of them of late, obviously due to results, is less of a finisher than the other.
I wouldn't be surprised at all if Ryan Spann won this fight by first round knockout. I'm just going to get that out of the way right now. If Nikita Krylov comes into this fight thinking he's fighting the ghost of Alexander Gustafsson still, and he's just going to go gung-ho and see what happens, Ryan Spann's going to put him down and probably knock him out because he is the much more heavy-handed striker in this matchup. Now, if Krylov is able to implement his kicks, and I think those will be very important for him throughout this matchup, because the one thing about Ryan Spann is he's a devastating fighter on the inside. He's a pretty good fighter at the mid-range too, I would say. But on the outside, if you're a guy who can kick and really use your movement well, you will stifle him a little bit. So I will be curious to see if Ryan Spann is able to check leg kicks, because that'll be the thing. If you can check some leg kicks on the outside and make Nikita Krylov be more of a stationary target, it's going to allow him more opportunities to land those power shots. Now, I'm not saying he's going to win the fight. It's just going to give him more chances to be in the matchup. And I think that's really important. But I just think with Krylov, he does have the better volume in the matchup, and he does throw the much more varied shots on the feet. Now, if he does get a little kick happy, he does leave himself open to some guys throwing the overhand. So maybe we could see Ryan Spann as crazy as this would be, remember when Carlo Pedersoli got knocked out when he threw the head kick and Dwight Grant ducked underneath and threw the overhand? One of the best knockouts you will ever see in the UFC. We could see a situation like that, as crazy as it would be. But again, I see Nikita Krylov, he throws a lot more from the outside, and it's a position that he does excel in. And if he is able to at least threaten with the takedown and put more thoughts into the mind of Ryan Spann, just make him think a lot more defensively about what he has to worry about, then I do favor Nikita Krylov.
So Tristan's saying Spann has 8 guillotines in his career, and we've definitely seen that out of his fights with the LFA, with the UFC. He's had a ton of success there. When you look at a guy like Nikita Krylov, I mean, it's like he's listening to Taking Me Back, your favorite song. And actually, it's here somewhere. I don't know where it is. It's behind me. It's somewhere. I bought the record on the weekend, if you can believe it. I bought the record. But if you look at it, he just goes absolutely balls to the wall, and you don't know what note Jack White's going to play out of that guitar. That's kind of what Nikita Krylov fights like. It's absolutely all over the place. Now, if he decides to go out there and grapple, look at what he was able to do against a big, tall, rangy guy who's also 6'5", who also strikes very well, in Johnny Walker. What'd he do? He made that fight the most boring fight to go back and watch because he was able to just hold on to positions for minutes on end. So when you look at the fight, Matt, and you're stacking up the attributes, who has the height advantage? Ryan Spann. Who has the reach advantage? Ryan Spann. Who has the power advantage? Ryan Spann. Who has the striking advantage?
They're too different. Like they're the same but different. You know, like Ryan Spann hits harder and has better boxing. He has decent defense with his hands, but again, Krylov throws a lot more kicks, throws more varied kicks, throws from a lot different angles. So they're both good strikers.
Questionable on both sides. I mean, Ryan Spann's got finished by the same knockout, trying to lock his hands for a double leg takedown. He's got elbowed and didn't know to let go.
Krylov's one of the great offensive, but also one of the awful defensive grapplers we've ever seen. So, like, these are two of the bigger question mark fighters on the roster. But that's why this fight's going to be so good.
55% at Fight Night Picks on Instagram going with Spann to get the win. And here in the YouTube community tab, Matt, 54% going with Nikita Krylov. So both fighters favored on different polls from Fight Night Picks. It's a really, really tough one. I mean, Fender Jazz saying the last 2 wins for each guys are versus opponents whose best days are behind them. It's so tough to read. And Linny saying Krylov is the Michael Chandler of light heavyweight.
Michael Chandler
doesn't have a big right hand, though. Yeah, he doesn't have a big right hand and a jab. He tends to throw a lot of blitzes. But I agree. I mean, he's got wrestling. He's got heavy hands.
Michael Chandler's never been in a boring fight in his life, though.
Yeah, and I've seen some boring Nikita. The Brent Primus fight wasn't that great. The rematch.
He Khabib'd him for 25 minutes.
Yeah, some people don't like that. All right, Matt. So the pick in this matchup is...
I gotta be honest. I thought about switching the pick on this. That's how close of a fight I do see this. I really do think Ryan Spann is a very dangerous underdog in this main event because he's dangerous in all the right ways. He has close range power. I do think Nikita Krylov is going to at least feint a takedown at some point. And I think all of those opportunities are going to add up to where Ryan Spann could even hurt Nikita Krylov at some point. I just think Krylov has more avenues to get a win. I think for that reason, I do favor him. I think he can win by decision. I can see him getting maybe like a ground and pound finish. I know that sounds a little wild, but maybe we see Krylov hurting Spann on the feet, getting on top from that top position. Krylov does have good ground and pound. He does have good head and arm chokes from the top position. I worry about him defensively, oddly enough, grappling. Because again, Krylov's really good in the top when he's grappling. He's also like odd and will just forget stuff and have these lapses in judgment at some points that you do worry about. And that's why I struggle with predicting Krylov against like the top tier elite fighters in the division. I don't think Ryan Spann's in that category though, unfortunately, or at least not yet. Maybe he will continue to make improvements.
Jamal Hill's the champion.
But you know this about me. I've said this for a while that I think Jamal Hill was going to be champion and I want him to fight Aliev. Like, I'm not surprised about that at all. Like, check the record, bud, to quote Uriah Faber. Like, I've been talking about Jamal Hill for a hot minute now, and I think he's far better than Ryan Spann. So I have Krylov, but it's a difficult fight for him.
I do also have Krylov in the matchup, but it's a really tough fight. And I know Sean V talking about the fact that Krylov's never been knocked down at light heavyweight. The boy's been put on skates, and we've seen that in the past. Nikita Krylov, just when he gets hit, he shells up, and he tends to just stand there, and he becomes incredibly reactive if you hit him, especially from range or in tight. Like, Nikita Krylov struggles with distance management in the majority of his fights, and when you blitz on him, he'll get behind the block line, use the cage to his advantage, try and make it a little boring. But I have Nikita Krylov. Really, really hard fight to try and go with. I even
yeah.
considered the switch of the pick in this one as well, the Spann. But Matt, with question mark kicks, we go back down through the entire card. I'll be at the Canadians game tonight, so I'm not going to have a chance to watch it. It'll be a rewatch, and the UFC 285 content will be coming at you in the not-so-distant future.
That's going to be a great card, guys.
First fight on the card, Alves versus Aliev. Like, you talk about the hard fights to try and pick on this one, the co-main event, the main event, the first fight on the card. I have Nurullo Aliev, but boy, oh boy, is this a tough test in your first UFC fight.
It definitely is, but he is a prospect with tremendous upside when you think about it. And when you think about it, like 23 years old, this guy can get a lot better in a short amount of time. So I do believe in the matchup, but like we've said all week long, basically, it's a really difficult fight for him.
Difficult fight in this one, Matt. Joe Solecki versus Carl Deaton III, going with Joe Solecki.
I also have Joe Solecki, but you might want to grab a snack or something while this one's on.
Osbourne versus Charles Johnson. Matt, Charles Johnson on short notice, catch weight of 130. Last guy to weigh in. The weigh-in didn't look the best, but he's here and he made it on the nose for 130. I have Charles Johnson based on the overall well-rounded skill set, but again, this is one of those really, really difficult fights.
It is. I agree. I have Charles Johnson. Should be a fun fight for as long as it lasts.
All right, next one we have, look at that, Jordan Leavitt taking on Victor Martinez. It's the striking versus the grappling. I have the grappling of Jordan Leavitt to get the win, but if you guys see Victor Martinez go out there and put on a y'all must have forgot, I haven't fought since 2021 with my boxing type of performance, wow. Would that surprise a lot of people, I would say?
Martinez could get the win, and if he does, again, it's going to be one of those like viral knockouts. You're going to see it all over Twitter probably. I just think Leavitt's wrestling is a little bit too dominant in this fight.
Jasmine Jasudavicius taking on Gabriella Fernandes. We differ on the pick. I'm going with Brazil's Fernandes. It hurts my heart as a Canadian.
I'm going with the Canadian. Give me Jasmine.
Going with Jasmine, Matt. Erick Gonzalez, SoCal Zone, taking on Alabama's Trevor Peak. Roll Tide, Matt. Going with Trevor Peak.
Trevor Peak, and probably by crazy knockout because he has insane power.
Mike Malott taking on Quebec's own Johan Lines, going with proper Mike Malott in the matchup. Another really tough one.
Yeah, it should be a really fun fight. I'm excited for this one, but I do have Mike Malott.
Tatiana Suarez taking on Montana De La Rosa, going with Tatiana Suarez.
I have Suarez in this one, yeah.
Augusto Sakai, Don'Tale Mays. Who the hell knows what Augusto Sakai is going to look like? I don't anymore. I'm taking him to win. How confident does that sound?
If the check engine light's not on, the gas light certainly is for Augusto Sakai. I do have him in the matchup because I know the highs are much higher than Don'Tale Mays'.
Yeah, my record is out there on picking his fights. Brendan Allen, Andrea Muniz, the switch of the pick. Give me the big underdog. Give me the namesake. Give me all in Brendan Allen.
I like Muniz. I just think his submissions and his grappling are too overwhelming in that one.
And in the main event, Nikita Krylov, Ryan Spann, Matt. I mean, both of us going with Nikita Krylov, but a really tough fight, again, for both guys. A good fight for the division. A little bit of clarity and parity up there at 205, which, I mean, Jan Blachowicz is getting up there. Glover Teixeira, is he going to be retired after this point? And then, of course, your former champion, Yuri Prochazka. When is he going to be back to challenge Jamal Hill? Very, very important fight. And obviously, Anthony Smith's always kind of creeping out there. So we'll see how Anthony Smith makes out in his next fight. But always interesting fights at light heavyweight. The former glamour division about what? 15 years ago?
15 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. So,
but yeah, this should be a really fun main event. Exactly. It felt like, is the winner of this going to become kind of the new Anthony Smith? The winner of this is going to go on to headline 2 or 3 more Fight Night cards, aren't they?
You have to hope.
It would be nice. Ryan Spann, if he wins this fight, I do think it will have proven that, hey, he has leveled up in his career. You know, the wins aren't just flukes over guys who, like people have said, are a little bit past their prime. And the same thing can be said for Nikita Krylov. Again, his losses are to some of the better fighters in the division, and his wins are over guys who, I wouldn't say Volkan Oezdemir is in his prime, and Gustafsson definitely isn't. So this is a really good resume-building win for both guys.
Matty G saying, Brendan Allen getting no respect. I thought I gave him a ton of respect. I think it's going to be a really fun fight card. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. The results will stay up on Instagram. I'm not going to have the opportunity, nor am I going to even peek at the fights. I'm not going to have the opportunity to update them with the results. So you get all that stuff tomorrow. Matt, UFC 285 videos, most likely, if I had to guess, it's going to be Monday or Tuesday. Again, I'm gone all weekend. Tomorrow I'm back, but I'm going to be doing my notes and getting like down and dirty and ready for the fight. So just keep yourself tuned in for the UFC 285 content. It's not always the best to be first. It's better to be researched and then put your stuff out there. A lot of people, they want us to be first, but you don't always want to be first on that stuff. Matt, I know you're really eager to see some of these fights and you're looking forward to Jake Paul and Tommy Fury, right?
I don't care about that, but I am extremely excited for the pay-per-view next weekend. There's so many great fights on that. The prelims are absolutely stacked. You have fights like Derek Brunson versus Dricus Du Plessis. Like, that's a fight that's on the prelim of that card. Ian Gary's fighting Song Kenan on the early prelims of that card. There's some great fights all around. And of course, you guys know I'm going to be excited for Mateusz Gamrot, Jalen Turner. That's going to be an incredible fight. And Jeff Neal, Shavkat Rakhmonov. Are you kidding? I haven't even mentioned the title fights yet. Like, that's how good of a pay-per-view we have next weekend.
I'm really looking forward to Jessica Penne, Tatiana Suarez, a fight that was made in September. Nah, I'm just kidding. It's a fight that's on the card. Matt, some big-time fights coming up next weekend. Make sure you check them out at Craig Allen FNP, at Matt Allen FNP, at Fight Night Picks over on Twitter and Instagram. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it.